Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to launch our very first TRASAL Talks, and TRASAL is traveling South Asian Lit Fest, and our mission is to bring together a diversity of South Asian literary voices to surface and deepen conversations around key issues in South Asia and its diasporas. It curates and documents historically underrepresented writings of people in both mainstream and regional South Asian languages and in translation. And now, please welcome Dr. Pramila Venkateswaran, who is the author of Tamil Dalit Feminist Poetics, Resistance, Power, and Solidarity. And she is also an award-winning poet, former Suffolk County Poet Laureate, and a leading voice among diaspora poets as well. And I am Poornima Janakiraman, your moderator for today. I am a small business owner and I've been part of TRASAL since the inception. And I cannot wait to get into conversation with Dr. Venkateswaran. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Poornima, for engaging with me in this conversation.
Of course.
Wonderful that you read the book and you're going to be speaking with me about this subject that is very close to my heart.
That's
And thank
amazing.
you, Alka Korean and the Trasal team for organizing Trasal Talks.
Yeah, of course. And now, just to get into the conversation, what is your book about and what inspired you to write this book?
So, as the title says, it's about the Tamil Dalit poets and the kinds of themes that their poetry addresses. And so the book is about all these different poets, contemporary poets who are writing in Tamil Nadu and who are Dalit. I chose to write about these poets mainly because when they write about caste, it is a testimony of their lived experiences. It is something that you cannot find in a sociology textbook or a history book, because these are testimonies of their everyday lives, um, lived out, expressing their gender injustice as well as caste injustice, because when you put gender injustice and caste injustice together, it creates the kind of violence that you wonder how it could exist in a democracy. And so it is very important for us to look at what some of the critics have called a traumatic materialism, because we are essentially talking about trauma, and we are talking about intergenerational trauma that's been going on for centuries. So, and we are talking about 25% of India's population, which is like an enormous number, right? So when that trauma, how do you express that? And when the poets write about it, they're able to really get into the very details of the somatic experience, how the body experiences trauma, and they bring that into their poetry. So that's why for me it was very important to read those poems to really understand what was going on and bring that to the English reading public that may not have known about these poets. And also within India, there is so much, not so much, I mean, there is some knowledge of Hindi poetry and Gujarati Dalit poetry, but there is not much of a knowledge about Tamil poetry. And
Oh,
especially
okay.
in the north, people don't really know about, Tamil poetry, and particularly the Tamil Dalit poetry, even among the Tamil speaking public. I mean, they don't really know about Tamil Dalit poetry. So I felt that it's very important to bring that, into people's experiences of, reading these poems. So in effect, I was attempting translating many of these poets because their translations don't exist in English. I mean, a few poems are translated here and there, but not many. And then I was also doing a feminist analysis, and I also had read a lot about Dalit politics. So I brought Dalit politics, feminist analysis, and translation, all three together in this book.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, even when I started reading the book, I was like, I mean, end of the day, art is political. Let's be honest about it. And just bringing that out in any which way that we can be creative is, I think, the best way we can, really put our lived experiences out there, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I think, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no, that's fine. I was going to say that the poets, talk about various themes about, like for example, the theme of pollution, um like the what's called lower caste. Again, the designation lower is something that is very demeaning. So we can say non-dominant. So or Dalit caste is seen as untouchable, was seen as untouchable, except that the name Dalit was given much later in the 1920s. Right. And the thing is, there is different names that are given in different regions of India. But the thing is, the pollution taboo is something that is still central in many of the households across the country. Like to touch a Dalit person is itself seen as a taboo. So, which means that one could never consider even marriage between a Dalit and a non Dalit. So, endogamy is something that is used to keep caste alive. So that's
Wow.
something, really one has to think about that how endogamy is basically used, which means that everybody is sort of totally bought into that idea of endogamy.
Wow. And this absolutely reminds me of slavery over here and how Black folks were treated. And it's very, and the endogamy is very similar. I think it's very akin to
Yeah.
white supremacy. I do have a question towards the end, but I
Yeah,
thought
yeah. In the
that's a
end, we
great
can talk
distinction.
more about that. But you're right on the money because it's very great that we're having this talk right during Black History Month because the connections are inescapable of Black experience and Dalit experience. And in fact, there is so much that is also written about it, and I address that in my book about the connections between African American experience and Dalit experience, and also the conversations that have happened over the course of the 20th century between Dalits and African American intellectuals.
Wow. Okay. I mean, there's so much to learn about. I would love to keep going on about this, but I
Yeah.
also want to know about how, Tamil Dalit poetry and music change the way we understand caste. I mean, that's a big part of your book, right? And also not just in history, but also in our everyday, like experiences in our daily lives. And
Right.
also, can you read one of the poems?
Yeah, that's a good, very good question. In fact, the entire book talks about how we can look at caste very differently once we start reading the poems and listening to the music. So let me give you a few examples. For example, in the music that you will hear towards the end of this session, the music mainly addresses some of the leaders in the Dalit movement, like Periyar or Ambedkar. Ambedkar was one of the writers of the Indian Constitution. So these are celebratory music about Ambedkar, about Periyar. And then there are other, songs which are questioning the beef taboo because now there is a beef police. Like if you're eating beef, there are going to be people coming to lynch you. So there is this severe restriction about, there's a stigma about non-vegetarianism, um, and especially beef eating because a cow is considered sacred. So in my book, I talk about how it came about that the cow was considered sacred. So it's really important to start questioning, why is vegetarianism called pure? Why is non vegetarian impure? How did these concepts even come about? How can a dark skinned person be someone that you cannot touch? Or, why is that person who is different caste, why can't we touch that person? The whole pollution thing doesn't make any sense. And especially if we are thinking about ourselves as rational, free, independent, all of those things that we see in a democracy, all of these other concepts seem ridiculous, right? But the thing is, it is so ingrained in the culture. So the poets, they start talking about this. They make fun of it. They use satire. They use wit. They use irony. They use lampoon. They use all of these different modalities to address these concepts in their poetry. And so you start thinking more about the concepts in your daily life. So, for example, there is so much that is caste is sanctioned even within the Hindu scriptures. So some of the poets, bring up some of the concepts in the Hindu scriptures, and then they, ask questions about that. Um, so, for example, the concept of, you know, I'm sorry, the Purusha Suktam, which is one of the, um, chapters in the Vedas. The idea is that, Brahma, out of Brahma's head becomes the Brahmin caste or the priestly caste, and out of his, torso comes the, the next caste, the merchant caste, and then the warrior caste comes from the arms, and then from the feet come the, Shudras, and then below the feet are the come the untouchables. I mean, it's there in the scripture, so you wonder why is that, and how come? And then you start asking questions about even in the religious texts. Like, for example, Meena Kandasamy has a poem called Ekalavyan. Ekalavya was one of the characters in the Mahabharata, and then he had to give away his thumb because he was better shot than Arjuna. So again, that's a question that one has to ask. Why is it that this has happened? So, but Meena Kandasamy, of course, has a very witty poem about Ekalaivan. So these are just examples that address some of these, taboos and also laws in the country. For example, the lack of safety, for laboring class. There are no safety rules for people who are working in sanitation, and we are called a very technologically advanced country, but then we still have sanitation issues where you send Dalit men into the manholes where there's so much toxic gas and many of them die in that, or women have to carry night soil. So these are questions that the poets address. So when you read all of these, you start wondering about these, and then you start listening more to some of the Dalit leaders and other people who are organizing movements, and you bring those issues to the forefront in terms of talking to political candidates, etc.
Wow,
So
I'm just like in shock right now.
yeah, I mean, I can go on with several things, but I think if we look at some of the poems, we'll begin to understand more about how caste enters like every part of our lives. So the first poem I'd like to read is a poem by Sukirtarani, and this poem is called Paraya God. And I selected this poem, this is my translation. I selected this poem to show how casteism enters our language itself. And I'm sure some of you in the audience may be speaking other Indian languages, maybe. And you can think about your own language and how caste infects your language. So this poem is called Paraya God. In Tamil, it is Parakadavul. You call the heat scorching your back, Paraya heat. If you scatter ripened grain, wasting becomes Paraya waste. If someone snatches what's in your hand plus your watch, you call them Paraya dog. When you work the land with the sweat of your brow, your labor is Paraya hard. If everything is prefixed Paraya, what will you call my boiling rage, you Paraya god? And so the final punchline really shows not just the rage, but it is like the irony that if everything that is derided everything that is difficult is derided as paraya, then would you also call the god as pariah god, especially if you are having a problem with the god? So why is that word prefixed with everything? Because it's thrown as an insult. And the word pariah is used as an insult, even for in the conversations between people. If someone is acting up, they say, "Oh, pariah." So it is so casually thrown around. Sugirta Rani questions that, again, making us realize, how casual the word pariah becomes.
And it's
And
also gone into English now, right? Because
yeah,
pariah is also the
exactly,
same
exactly.
thing.
So the British basically borrowed the word to denote the term outcast. So that's why in the English language we have the word pariah. So that's how we pronounce it, pariah. But in Tamil it's paraya.
Okay.
Um, and like I said earlier, there are different words that are used in each of the regional languages for paraya. So you may want to look into your own language, and what word that is used. Many of the Dalits have basically used the word and reclaimed it. That's the word I wanted to use. They reclaimed some of these insulting words, and they have said, okay, that's my designation. Like Sukirti Rani has a poem where she says, I'm Paraya. So she's actually claimed it as her identity, and she's not you know upset about it. In the sense, she says, okay, that's what I am. What are you going to do about it? So she has that attitude. So one of the things that many Dalit poets have that claim for themselves is audacity. And that's something that Isaivani, who is one of the lead singers in the Castless Collective, talks about. She talks about uh, the necessity for audacity.
And the couple of questions I want to ask, like, just from what you just said, the first thing that came to my mind is who, like, especially with eating beef and, uh, you know, um, how did that become such an impure topic?
Yeah.
And so that's something I wanted to quickly touch on.
You mean why it is impure?
Why is it impure?
Um, so this goes back to earlier centuries. So what happened was there were many poorer sections of the public that carried the dead carcasses of animals, and some of them were so poor, so they used to use that meat for eating. So that's how the whole idea of, so it caused a lot of smell because there was a lot of these dead carcasses, and somebody had to take those carcasses away from the city. I mean, the not city, middle of the public space. So the people who carried the cow carcasses were called untouchable because they
Okay.
carried them. But the thing is, they were poor, that's the reason. But the thing is, in order to bring about this stratification, what the priestly class did was they said, well, if they are carrying that, it means that we make the cow sacred. And then all these other people who are carrying the cow carcasses, they are going to be untouchable. So, which means that we are not going to be, I mean, we'll think of beef eating as something that is, a no-no. So Ambedkar actually goes into much more anthropological detail about this in his book. He was an anthropologist as well as many other things, but that was one of the subjects that he dealt with. And so he's written in great detail about this. And there's another writer whom I can point out to you, and his name is Ilaya, Kanta Ilaya Shepherd. Um, Kancha Ilya. So he has written again great detail in his book. I think it's called Gods, Brahmins, and Beef, or something like that. I don't remember the exact title. Um, but that's how the stratification started happening. Because in the beginning, I mean, everyone was eating meat. There was nothing like vegetarian and
Exactly.
non-vegetarian. That
Because we were all
separation did not
hunter-gatherers.
exist. Yeah.
Exactly. Because we
Yeah.
were all hunter-gatherers anyways.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at anthropology, it sorts out many of these questions that we have today.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
always interests me how we try our best to come up with oppressor mindset just to oppress others.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So these stratifications, there were so many stratifications that have been used to separate out the Dalits from the rest of society.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And my next question for you is, how are Dalit women's experiences uniquely shaped by both caste and patriarchy? Coming
That's a
to that. And also, does this book reveal that often gets erased? And would you mind reading us another poem?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because there is a lot we need to think about the how caste and I mean gender injustice and patriarchy combine together, and caste, gender, and yeah. So when you put gender injustice and caste injustice together, you get a really a violent picture. Because when growing up, I only knew about gender injustice. I was very conscious about gender injustice, especially in my teens. Um, and the thing is, in high school and I think undergraduate college in India, we didn't really study any Dalit writers or anything. The only writer we read was Mulk Raj Anand. And that's how I came to know a little bit about untouchability. And then, of course, we heard about Gandhi, saying no to untouchability. But I hadn't really gone much deeper than that. And the thing is, we were all also, I was, um, I was, what do you call it? I was middle class. So I was thinking about everything from my positionality as a middle class woman. So it was later on that I started thinking about how we need, when we think about any kind of gender issue, we also need to think about it in terms of class and caste, because that really changes the whole picture. So what I mean is that what seems very unjust to you from your standpoint as a middle class feminist can become even more different, and it creates a whole different picture when you are Dalit and a woman. So, for example, one of the biggest examples I can think of is violence against women. So, the violence against women is so rampant, but among Dalits, it is even worse because you have upper caste women and men who are violent towards Dalit women. So I think we need to think about that, because that means you cannot really paint women as, or totally like saints and who can do no harm. It's not true, right? So that's where caste privilege really harms people who are non-dominant caste.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know where I was going with this, but there is a poem that I'd like to look at, and this is by Meena Kandasamy, and this really goes to the heart of the idea of stratification, separation. What happens to our minds, to our psyches, if we really believe in the separation of people through the caste system? So the poem. So Meena Kandasamy writes in English. So hers are now translated. Her choice of language is English, even though she is Tamil Dalit. And the form of the poem is written in these two columns, and I'll tell you in a minute why it is written that way. And the title of the poem is Advaita, the Ultimate Question. So the title itself gives you a hint of what the poem is about. Non-dualism, Atman self, Brahman God, are equal and same. So I, untouchable outcast, am God. Will you ever agree? No matter what you preach, answer me. Through your saints, one more final question. Can my untouchable Atman and your Brahmin Atman ever be one?
Mm.
So, the whole philosophy of Advaita is that it is non binary. There is no separation between people because all of us are reflected in Atman or this ultimate soul, right? So, when you have that kind of concept that we are, and it's something that is told to us everywhere in the philosophy, right? But then in practice, if we stratify people and separate them, and create all kinds of rules by which you separate people, that means the whole point of this Advaita is lost. Um, it is just not practiced in reality. So, Meena Kandasamy, that's the reason she separates this poem into two columns and shows the that non-dualism is in fact dualism. So it is dualistic. So what we are experiencing is actually a lot of violence as a result of the separation of castes. So which means that we don't really believe that the Atman is same for everybody. You're saying that the untouchable does not even have an Atma. In fact, does not even have entry into the temples until recently.
Right.
For example, there was one temple in South India where the women actually, fought to be able to gain entry. And again, it was through writing very satirical music and poetry and reading it out. And so finally, the government, I think it was in 2018, where they gave temple entry for Dalits.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah. So So basically, in all of the examples that I've given you so far, you can see that kind of separation um, that is not just sanctioned within the sacred texts, but also it is there in the everyday lives that is being enacted day to day in many households.
Exactly. And this is such a beautiful poem. And just her and written in two columns, I couldn't understand what it was. And it's
Yeah.
so beautifully written. And it,
And
it is
also notice the
amazing.
very last, the question mark is a line by itself towards the very end.
Yeah,
And so she has a question to all of us, making us
exactly.
think. Yeah,
And it's beautiful. And I never even thought about it because we all talk about, especially in Hinduism, how we are non-binary and end of the day we all go to that one Atma. So it's monotheistic, right?
yes,
But at the same time, we kind of, the polytheistic stuff happens and we tend to start separating
yeah,
everyone.
yeah.
It's very interesting. No, this is amazing.
Yeah, I want to
Really,
also point out that from the earliest times, there have always been counter narratives, counter cultural movements against Vedic philosophy. And this is something people don't really know about and they don't talk about.
good.
So, even within Hinduism, you have so many poets, popular poets like Kabir, um, you know, Mirabai, there were Andal, Avayar. I mean, they all questioned these kind of caste differences.
Wow.
They didn't really fall into that trap. Even the, what do you call them, Nandanar, was a poet saint. In fact, many of the Marathi Dalit poet saints, they all questioned caste differences.
I hope more and more we start questioning not just poets and people who are into activism. I think just the general crowd needs to start questioning. I
Yeah,
think anytime there's a separationist attitude, I think we all have to question why we are better than the other person and why the other person that we are othering doesn't have the right to live a dignified life, right? So I think this poem does a great job of just talking about that.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
of
And
course.
yeah, of course. And coming on to the next question, I was like, how does this book challenge the narratives we are taught, right? Again, going back about caste. and growing up with the casteism that's kind of indoctrinated into you from a very young age. And also would love to, can you talk about, I mean, can you read us another poem? One last poem?
So, how did it challenge my notion of caste growing up?
Yeah, how does this book challenge the narrative that we are
Oh,
taught growing up about
okay.
caste?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so because growing up, we are just taught, well, there are four castes and it's all based on the Varna system, in the sense it's based on the jobs people do. So if you're a priest or you're an intellectual, you're going to be Brahmin caste. And then if you're born into the merchant class, business or whatever, that's your caste. So there are these stratifications, but there is no mobility. When we talk about the class system, you say, oh, there's class mobility, but there is no caste mobility.
That's a
Right? A
great point.
Dalit can say, oh, I've stopped becoming Dalit, I want to be Brahmin. Or a Vaishya saying, okay, right, from now on I'm going to be, some other caste.
Yeah.
And the thing
It
is,
just
people,
doesn't happen.
yeah, and among the Dalits, of course, you have Dalits who have hidden their caste because of the terrible violence against them. So, yeah, I think you may have read Yashika Dutt's book, Coming Out as Dalit.
I have it
So,
actually.
growing up, she hid her Dalit identity. It's only after many years later, I mean, after she came to this country, that she has come out as Dalit.
Oh my God.
So there are many people who basically hide, their last names or whatever to be able to not be identified as Dalit. So there is also the concept of, self-identity and all of that. So, so the narrative we are fed is that, oh, this is how it is. This is the Varna system. There's nothing wrong with, you know, us being separated according to our professions. It's not really. I mean, it's all a bollocks. Um, uh, and there are so many other things like, oh, you have to get married within your caste, and then you have to eat vegetarian food because that makes you pure. I mean, them. I'm not saying there's benefits to eating vegetarian, but the thing is, using food as a way to separate people, that is wrong. It is unethical.
Exactly.
And so basically there are a lot of these narratives that we're fed, and especially the pollution thing that doesn't make any sense. Like we were all you grow up in these households in dominant castes, and we are told, like for example, women are told, oh, you cannot touch anyone, when you have your period, you cannot go to the temple, uh, you can, and then other pollution taboos, like you cannot touch anyone who is taken a bath. You cannot, I mean, it sounds ridiculous when I'm saying it. And then you cannot touch a person who is of different caste and who's Dalit, or you cannot invite other people of other caste to your homes. I mean, there are all of these other rules, and it's spread across the country. And of course, some people in urban households would say, oh, we don't follow any of that. But the thing is, okay, what are the other rules that we are not seeing and that's hidden? So
Exactly.
that's a question that we need to ask. Um, so basically, the narratives that I'm taught growing up, when I started reading Dalit poetry, all of those narratives, I mean, as it is, I found them bogus, but I found them really totally not worth really listening to.
Yeah, because
Um,
I've been through that too. So I can relate to not touching when you have your period. And I thought even as a child, I would rebel because I didn't understand. It doesn't even make sense. And I think more and more you're talking about it. It's, we talk about, I'm just connecting it to white supremacy and the Third Reich, what Hitler did with miscegenation and endogamy. This is literally another form of endogamy,
exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
right? To keep
yeah.
keeping people in
In
that
fact,
same ethnic group.
right. Like in this country, they had the anti-miscegenation laws. So, which means
Exactly.
a black person cannot marry anyone who's white. right?
exactly.
And it was there till 1964, was it? Or
I'm
maybe
not
a little
sure. It
earlier.
was
Yeah,
until, yeah, it's not like very far away.
yeah.
It was like,
Yeah, I know there's a American poet, Natasha Trethewey. In fact, she writes a poem about that because her black mother married a white man, and so they had to travel. I mean, to a different state. They were living in the Mississippi. They had to travel to another state to get married.
oh, goodness. Wow.
Anyway, I'd like to share with you another poem.
Yes,
And this
please.
poem is very interesting because remember earlier I had told you that B.R. Ambedkar had this very long, drawn out dialogue with Mahatma Gandhi because Mahatma Gandhi was against untouchability but would not touch the caste system. And Ambedkar felt that the caste system itself should be abolished because that is really hurting our democracy. And we were fighting for independence from British rule. It only made sense that if we really wanted freedom and freedom of all the people in India, that we should not have a whole set of people who did not have any freedom uh, within the caste system. So he was actually thinking about freedom in the broadest sense, you know. So he was thinking about liberation for all. So at that time, when there was this disagreement between him and Gandhi, he decided that he didn't want to have anything to do with Hinduism, and he converted to Buddhism. And at the same time, a lot of his followers, they all converted to Buddhism. So I was looking at this particular poet, Aranga Mallika, um, and oh, her name is not here. So I translated this poem. It is called Niral in Tamil, and it's translated as shade in English. And I chose to translate this poem because it really shows how a Buddhist feminist is looking at Buddhism. So let me read the poem to you. Niral. Ananda closely shadows Buddha. Shade is blissful. The present shade from heat. The light of the moon is a light of wisdom. Silence. Silence brings rapture. Rapture is Ananda. Shade is Ananda. Love shade. Virtuous shade. Love is everything. So notice the total difference between Arangamallika's poem and the poem by Meena Kandasamy. So in this poem, Arangamallika is um, actually doing a little bit of wordplay with the word Ananda. Ananda
Mm.
was a very close disciple of Buddha, and he followed him everywhere. And Ananda also means bliss in Buddhist philosophy, bliss in the sense of achieving nirvana. So those are the dual meanings of Ananda here, and also she's quibbling on the word shade. So it's not just shade, but also shadowing someone. So she's using it in both ways. And also notice that the kind of rapture she's talking about, it is not just present in the individual, but it is there in the and it permeates the entire atmosphere, and it also permeates the cosmos. So she is bringing everything into it, and as if everything is completely infused with love. So we can really see the kind of uh, wisdom that she is talking about, wisdom that exists in Buddhism, but it infects her whole being. And that is the kind of wisdom that she's bringing to all her other poems that she's writing. Even though she's writing about realities of Dalit lives, she's bringing about the that kind of love she has for other people and the things she sees, the land. She talks a lot about the land and the agricultural workers, the laborers and labor. And so she brings that love for the land and the love for people into her poems. So what we realize when you're reading Dalit poetry is that there is a lot of joy in community, There's a lot of love that is sort of pervasive, and it exists in terms of community building, and and love for the land, love for nature, um, you know, and also paying attention to the body. Again, that's a very difficult thing to do for Dalit people, mainly because of trauma, right? But despite that, the poets are trying to bring the attention back to the body, especially the women poets. They're bringing their attention back to the body and saying how one can love one's body. Even that body is made to feel as if it is unwanted, not even, allowed to exist. And so they are rebelling against that and saying that we exist, and you can see us. We are going to be there. We are there, and we are writing, and we are publishing. We are
Yeah,
making our works known.
yeah,
So if we want to have a democracy that is a true democracy, a loving democracy, that means we cannot have something as immoral and unethical as the caste system.
completely agree.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, but at the same time, I'm so glad people who've been told, that you need to fight for your dignity
Mm-hmm.
and your survival are actually doing so in such a beautiful way. And I think that's where we need to kind of see how, you know, uh, sadly, it's the oppressors who are the savage, but instead they call the oppressed the savages, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and no, thank you so much for sharing these poems. They're beautiful. And coming to our last question, this is something I hadn't kind of really noticed before, but I did when reading your book, is how slavery in the United States and across the globe, right, is eerily similar to the caste system. And, especially in South Asia. So can we talk more about this? I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, but if we could talk more on this, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you remember from reading African American narratives and also African American history, slave narratives, etc., you would have noticed how the segregation was practiced, right? So the kind of separation of peoples, lack of access to education, even during Reconstruction. I'm talking about most of the 19th century, up until 20. Up until 1945.
Okay.
I would say no, actually up to 1960s till the civil rights. So I'm talking about like from 1850 onwards all the way up to, let's say a full 7500 period, 100 years period of reconstruction. You can see how segregation was practiced. So in segregation, there was lack of access to education, lack of access to housing, lack of access to basically protection from even law enforcement. There was, you did not really matter in the law. Your word would not count, right? So there was, you basically were an outcast in society. And so black people basically lived with that sense of not being accepted as citizens of the country. So when you look at that, when you look at Dalit experience, you find that there is total exposure to violence
Mhm.
on a day-to-day basis. So, and that violence is still continuing today. Today it's the love jihad. That is, if a Dalit person marries someone who is outside of their caste, say a dominant caste person, uh, there is honor killing that happens where the family itself, kills the person who they married to. So and there is no support from police if there is a attack by members of the dominant caste. There is no support from the police to protect them. So when there is such lack of protection, like even the 1960s, you must have seen many of those black and white photographs in the US of police attacking black people. And even our John Lewis, who passed away just in 2021, he was a civil rights icon. And I've seen pictures of him, being beaten by white. I even wrote a poem about that. Beaten by a white policeman, and up until 2021, he fought for us. Even went on a, I think, overnight strike in the White House, not White House, in the Senate. Um, you know, for passing, I think, one of those bills. Um, in any case, so there is this lack of freedom in public space, lack of social space, lack of political space. That is what brings both Dalit experience and Black experience together. You know, total lack of protection. You so I think when we talk about Black liberation, we can think about Dalit liberation in the same way. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this was actually very thought-provoking. Thank you. And those are the questions I have. Now, we're ready to open, um, to the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat and we can ask that.
Would it be okay if I just asked my question?
Yeah, perfect. Go for it.
Hi, Pramila. Hi, Poornima.
Hi.
I don't think this is anything that nobody here is not thinking of, but a lot of what you said really made me think about that book Cast by Isabel Wilkerson that came out, I think
Yeah.
maybe just before COVID. And I think what I really liked about the way she organized her book was she sort of had 7 or 8 sort of big rules, which is just what you were talking about, right? And these sort of like rules around pollution and intermarriage and things having to do with people using with black and white people using swimming pools, and how there was sort of this idea that better that nobody has it, which is then to share it with black people, right? And I'm wondering, is that anything that has been, and that I think is something that we in the States are still grappling with when it comes to things like health insurance, right? And like a lot of sort of economic issues, that there is a real feeling that I don't want those people to have it, so I don't want to have it either. And I was just wondering, is that something that comes up as a theme in any of the poetry that you have read or worked on? And then, so that's one question. And then my other question was just, could you read us something in Tamil? Just because that's what my family speaks, and I would love to hear any one of those that you've translated in the original, just to hear.
You want me to read in the original Tamil?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I don't have it in front of me.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, about your first question about the kind of health disparities. I mean, so far when the poets that I've read, they don't really talk about the health disparities, but it comes out in other ways, like in terms of violence against women. For example, they write a lot about rape because it goes on so rampantly that the kind of attention that needs to be given to women, girls who are undergone such horrible rapes, that's really not, that kind of attention is not given. In fact, sometimes it's too late to get to the victims. But you're talking about something that happens in this country, right?
Yeah, I'm just talking about that general feeling, sort of in
Yeah.
dominant class.
That's definitely casteist, saying that, oh, who cares about those people? Like, for example, the way they're talking about undocumented immigrants. Oh, they don't, why should we even bother about giving them any health insurance? Or why should we bother to treat them well? Or, all the stuff. I mean, it's like saying that they are the discards of society. which is terrible because we are talking about human rights issues. I mean, this book is essentially about human rights. I mean, we don't say Dalit. I mean, of course, the Dalit movement, they say Dalit rights are human rights, but but in general public, we don't think about their rights as human rights. Just like the undocumented immigrants, we don't think of that as human rights.
Actually, right now we're seeing it sort of. So, oh, I'll let everybody else go, and then I have one more question at the end if there's time.
Thanks, Timothy. There are a couple of questions here that's coming up. One is I'll start with, can you talk about the significance of the color blue here?
Ah, so color blue is the color of non-discrimination because the sky is blue. So Dalits have adopted that color as a symbol. So even the flag is blue color. And so we are all wearing blue.
Yeah, in
I
some.
wanted to wear the same blue as what Poornima is wearing, but I couldn't find that sweater.
That's okay. Well, thank you. That's actually really nice. I didn't know about that. And how comfortable do you feel talking about Dalit identity as a non-Dalit person?
So I had a lot of questions when I first started the book, whether I should even write the book, because I was thinking I don't want to take the place of a Dalit person who should be writing this book. But then I thought a lot about it and I said, you know what, I am basically an ally and I'm going to be a spokesperson. So one of the things that I did was I became friends with two Dalit poets who by translating Sukirtarani and Arangamalika, and I started having conversations with them on WhatsApp. I invited them to the Matwala Dalit poetry panel that I organized in 2021. And I also invited a Gujarati poet, Umesh Solanki. He also read his poems in Gujarati, and I had a translator, Gopika Jadeja, who translated his poems. So basically, I started forming these relationships, and after that, and earlier in 2012, I had actually written a paper on Dalit poetry, which I presented at NEMLA. And there I met Roja Singh, who has written a book on Dalit issues. It's called The Spotted Goddess. So so through the years, I've been sort of having conversations with her, and I read the book. And so that's how little by little I started, thinking more about, writing the book. Finally, I did write the book, but in the opening chapter, I declare myself as my position as a middle class, person of the Brahmin caste, and that, I felt that I was in a position to talk about the injustices, not just gender injustice, but it felt it was so important to talk about gender in relationship with caste, because that really changes the whole picture, that it was very important, and that this was my activism to actually translate Dalit poets, the Tamil Dalit poets, and write about their work.
You've done a great job. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have like a couple of more questions. So let's see if we can get it into like within the 4 minutes that we have. I'm curious about Dalit women's experience in rural versus urban areas. Is caste dominance actually weaker in cities, or is it just less visible?
Yeah, in cities it is less visible, like all the examples I gave you earlier, like lack of access to. Well, now you have a little more access to education than previously because you have reservation. But even with reservation, there's always a stigma. So when a Dalit person is in the classes, they say, oh, you got in because of reservation. It's like the way affirmative action and its effects on Black people here. So African Americans say, oh, you're basically because of reservation, I mean, your affirmative action, you're in. So that kind of stigma. And in the workplace, they face discrimination, just like in this country, in some of the tech firms, Dalits have experienced discrimination. And that's why the caste bill, finally it got passed in Seattle. I think it was bill number, I even wrote it down. There was a bill that was passed in Seattle in 2023, basically caste as a protected category. The bill was defeated in California.
Wow.
But why was it defeated? Again, you had a very strong lobby of the dominant castes who said, don't pass a bill that's going to talk about caste, because caste doesn't exist. But of course it does. So in the workplaces especially, you do see that segregation happen. Like I mentioned earlier, through food, or, you invite people over and then you make sure you don't invite the Dalit people over. So or your team gets promoted, you make sure that the other person doesn't get promoted. So all of those things, those are invisible. And in the villages, what has happened is that the whole Brahminical ideology, it has traveled down the whole caste system. So which means you have slightly dominant castes above the Dalits, who basically use that kind of ideology to oppress the Dalits. So it plays out in the villages, like I said, in the kind of violence where you have honor killings. Plays out also in the agricultural sector. So you have landlords who can oppress the Dalit laborers. And that's something that Meena Kanzasamy has written a lot about. And then there are other activists, land activists, like Thirumal Velvan. I have written about Thirumal Velvan in my chapter on land, where he writes a lot about how Dalit laborers are basically violated. So in this country, Dalits were basically hired to work at the Swaminarayan temples in New Jersey, and they were paid like a pittance. So it was slave labor, and that got taken to court. I don't know how it was resolved. But again, you see that exploitation happening right here.
My goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that, and also the bill that was passed in Seattle as a protected category. And that was one of the questions I had. And do we have, I know we are at time, do we have time for another question, one more?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is from Radhika. Do you feel like that there is also linguist bias discrimination between Tamil, Telugu, North and South India, or such others in the Dalit community? That's a great question.
Oh, among the Dalit community? I'm sorry, I'm not aware of it.
Okay, I was just curious, so
Yeah, but that's a very good question.
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
Well,
excellent.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for talking us through this amazing book. I think we all have a lot to learn from this and actually dig deeper, which I will be doing for sure. And I'm so honored to be part of this. And thanks to Alka Kurian, who's the founder of TRASAL, for bringing us together and starting this wonderful talk as well.
Yeah, thank you, Poornima, and thank you, Alka, and thank you, TRASAL. I will end with this piece of music, which is called Ambedkar, and it's sung by the lead singer of the Casteless Collective called Isaivani. And I'll play you a tiny excerpt, which is about let's remove caste, wipe away caste, because it is pernicious. And she talks about Ambedkar and what he's done for the country. So I'm just going to share that video with you as a closing. Thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pramila. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. This is